time for something a little bit different, and this is something that sort of is a personal hobby of mine in addition to war games and board games that I think a lot of people who appreciate war games will also appreciate. So this is a segment that I like to call Comics for Wargamers, because in the same way that there's a whole plethora of conflict simulations and war games out there that tackle a whole number of topics, and not only tackle a whole number of topics, but tackle the topics from different viewpoints and tackle the topics in different ways, and sort of speak a different language about maybe even the same subject material across games. The same is true in comic books. And, I'm working on a game design right now myself that requires a lot of research and knowledge and a lot of reading of other sources to sort of get the historical details correct. And any designer who's developed a historical game will tell you that there's a lot of what goes into a game is actually based on documented source material, whether that's first-hand accounts, third-hand accounts, historical analysis, all of those things. And so a lot of games actually come with bibliographies for further reading, which I really appreciate. But in this particular instance, I wanted to focus on the historical fiction aspect of history as it relates to war games in comics, because there's actually a lot of material out there that's super interesting, really compelling, beautiful to look at, tells great stories, really well written by really talented writers and artists. And I think if you find the narrative aspect of war games interesting and compelling like I do, you might appreciate some of the stuff that I have for this segment. So I have actually plenty of ideas for a number of these. And so I'll see how it's received. And then, if you want to see more, I can do more. But I wanted to start off with a series of books that I have read recently. And that is War Stories by Garth Ennis, published by Avatar Press. Now, these are, I think these are still pretty readily available. I don't think they're out of print. I think you can actually get them pretty easily online. There's 4 volumes, and it's an anthology series of war stories, essentially, mostly about World War II, but some of them are not World War II, although they are of kind of that era. So I just wanted to take you through these and kind of show you what they look like and kind of what they're about. So Garth Ennis, obviously, is a comic book writer who is very well known. He's done some of the, one of the most well-known and prolific writers in comics history. He's done series like Preacher, The Darkness. He's done a crazy amount of material for Punisher, for Marvel, which is just fantastic, as well as some other stuff. But there's basically two kind of versions of Garth Ennis stories. The Boys, that's another one that he did that's really popular. Obviously, has an Amazon TV show. He wrote the comic version of that. And he has kind of 2 modes. He's got sort of his raunchy, over-the-top, hyper-violent entertainment mode, I guess you could say. And that's stuff like The Boys. But then he's also got like a really grounded, poignant human drama side that he employs in things like Punisher or in things like War Stories. Especially with his war fiction. He's probably one of the comic writers who has the largest portfolio of historical fiction war comics just ever, really. So there's a lot more material from him than I can showcase if you enjoy this, but I wanted to start with this series here. So Avatar Press is a small publisher, independent publisher, and he wrote basically short stories for them. So let's talk about these a little bit. So I'll show you the first one. So this is the first book here. This is, it's got artists like Dave Gibbons, who you may know. He did Watchmen, a very famous comics artist. John Higgins, David Lloyd, Chris Weston. There's some phenomenal art in this series. So let's just open this up and I'll try and show you. So this first story here, Johann's Tiger, this one's about a German tank crew who, in the waning days of World War II, decide that they are going to basically, instead of surrendering to the Soviets, they're going to surrender to the Americans. And so they're, without permission and against orders, traveling from the East Front to the West Front through Germany, basically trying not to get caught by other German military units, and fight their way through, basically, so they can surrender to the U.S. on the Western Front, so that the crew will be treated better. So it's really cool. It's obviously got some great art, some tank battles if Panzer versus tanks is your thing. But you get to know the crew, you get to know their commander, why he's doing what he's doing, and I won't spoil it for you, but it's a cool story. The second story in here, and this is, I think, one of the better ones that I think showcases Garth Ennis's real talent, and that is DJ Dodgers. So, you know, there's this sort of apocryphal account of British Parliament talking about all the soldiers that they had in Italy on the Italian front during World War II, and how, you know, those soldiers got a reputation for not wanting to be a part of the D-Day landings. They'd rather have an easy posting in Italy. But as you probably know, or if you don't, the fighting in Italy was extremely brutal. And Garth Ennis does a really good tribute here to them. It's about a unit of British soldiers who are in Italy, and kind of sort of what they face, and the idea that, you know, the people back home don't appreciate what they're doing because they're sort of, you know, not a major focus of the war, and like how they kind of deal with the fact that they're far from home, they're dying for their country, but their country doesn't appreciate them. Some great art in this one as well, and it's just, you know, a really respectful look at what the kind of stuff that, you know, British soldiers on the Italian front had to go through even while they were being underappreciated. Some great characters in this one. Okay, so this is another one that I really enjoy. It's called Screaming Eagles. This one's the one penciled by Dave Gibbons, the artist from Watchmen. This one is actually really funny. The premise is really funny. It's about this American squad who's ordered to go do some forward recon against the German lines as the U.S. is heading towards Berlin, basically. And they don't want to do it because there's Germans everywhere. And so they get assigned to go recon this castle, basically in sort of the countryside. That's held by the Germans. And when they get there, they realize that there's no one there. The Germans have retreated, and they've left basically all the art and booze in the castle. And so they decide that they're going to take some R&R and enjoy the 48 hours they have to recon this location without telling anyone that there's no one there. And so they basically find some local folks in the village to come and party with them, and they're, you know, they hang out in this thing. They do stupid stuff. They do target practice. They drink a lot. They kind of bullshit about, you know, what it's like being in the war and how much they deserve this for all the crap that they've gone through. Obviously, graphic content. It's bloody. You know, Garth Ennis stuff is gonna pull no punches. It's not for kids for sure, but it's a really funny story. And then the last one in here is actually about the Arctic convoys. It's called Nightingale. It's about a crew of, you know, a ship in some of the Arctic convoys that were sailing supplies into Russia. And it's just kind of about the challenges they faced and some of the decisions they had to make. This one in particular is, you know, they're getting attacked by the Germans via air, and how many close calls they have. And, you know, is the ship cursed even though they keep living, and sort of what happens, you know, how do you help other members of a convoy who may get attacked or are in trouble. This one is, again, very powerful in the same way that the one about the Italian front was. And the art in this one is actually my favorite in this book. It's just like this sort of dreamlike kind of muted color palette really conveys sort of the winter darkness of being in the Arctic at sea all by yourself, always under threat of German attack. So volume 2, you've got some other well-known comics artists, Gary Erskine, Carlos Esquerra, been around for a long time. This volume actually has some good stories as well. So this, I believe, is J for Jenny. This one is about a B-17 bomber crew, I believe. No, I'm sorry. This is a British bomber crew, and it's about their bombing missions over Europe, essentially. Some just amazing art. And one of the things that Garth Ennis is known for when he's writing these comics is to make sure that his artists can draw the equipment and vehicles accurately to history, to real life. And so you get a lot of great, in this one, a lot of great aerial combat scenes. You know, what it's like. I mean, this is obviously very, you know, grim stuff, but sort of the danger that these bombing crews were in when they would fly missions. It's a really good look at that. This story here. This is a North African story. It's about some British soldiers who are in charge of raiding German airfields in North Africa. It's called the Reavers, and it's sort of about a raid that goes wrong one night when they bite off more than they can chew, and sort of how they deal with that. The art in this one is phenomenal. I love the artist on this one. The artist on this one is, let's see if I can check the front. The artist on this one is Cam Kennedy, who is one of my favorite artists. He's done a lot of work for 2000 AD in the UK, but just love the way he draws faces and his sort of scene positioning. It's really good. Colors are great too. Got a lot of sort of desert purples, desert yellows. But yes, it's quite a good story. Also pretty tragic, but you know, it's a war story. So this one's really interesting. This is Condors. This is a story. It's actually not World War II. This is actually a Spanish Civil War. And this one is actually, so the premise of this one is that four soldiers who are all part of different parts of the Spanish Civil War are stuck overnight in a foxhole while fighting is happening around them. One of them is a German fighter pilot who's come over to Spain to train as part of the Luftwaffe before World War II begins, which is a real thing. There's a former Irish revolutionary, I believe, who is trapped in this hole. He's come over to fight. Because there's no fighting left to do in Ireland. And, you know, one of the main themes that Garth Ennis weaves in all of his books, doesn't matter if he's writing sci-fi or fantasy or history, he loves to talk about the Irish Civil War and sort of the effect that had on the Irish psyche. Obviously, he's Irish, so he feels very personally about it, and so he always incorporates Irish characters who have a history into his work, either directly touched by that conflict or related to that conflict and sort of how that's manifested itself in Irish society today. There's a I believe a Republican Spanish soldier in the foxhole with them, and they just kind of have a conversation about how they got there, why they're fighting, why they've come to Spain to fight either for or against the Republican side. And you know, it's pretty interesting. Kind of contextualizes what would happen in World War II later, especially the German fighter pilot. This guy, he has a really interesting story about why he joined the German Air Force at Luftwaffe, and you know, what kind of keeps him going. It's a good one. All right, and the final one in this book is called Archangel, and this is about British fighter pilots. He has a really funny relationship with his wife. She's kind of very cavalier about his war effort, and he's always afraid that every time he goes out, he's going to die. And so he basically gets assigned to a new sort of experimental role, sort of against his will, and that role is being one of the catapult fighters that they mounted on the front of the Arctic convoys on the way to Russia. And there's this like really funny scene where his commanding officer, as part of this project, is like. He's like, is it dangerous? He's like, oh, well, you know, I did it and I was fine. He's like, oh, really? You were part of this program? And he's like, well, I was the test pilot for it. And, you know, I could have died at any moment, but it was fine. It'll all work out. And he kind of was like, oh boy. But it's actually really cool. There's some cool action scenes in this one where he launches off the bow of a ship and takes out some German fighters because they don't see him coming. There's some great aerial combat scenes in this one. So that's volume 2. This is volume 3. You can see the artist here. Keith Burns is a well-known artist in comics. And this one has some, so Castles in the Sky. This is about another bomber crew story. This is what an awesome splash page this is of just like the chaos happening over Germany. And it's about sort of this bomber crew and, you know, what they go through. This is the B-17 one I mentioned. Yes, it's the B-17 crew. So it's about a B-17 crew. Obviously, you know, the subject of many novels and movies and games even with Queen of the Skies. But it's sort of about them and their families and, you know, the hell that they're going through. Even stuff like a B-17 blowing up on the runway as they're taking off for a mission. Just some really gnarly stuff. But you know, it's great war fiction. It really captures the period and sort of the stuff they go through. You know, the gunners, how they're sighting fighters on incoming, how many times the plane is, you know, taking hits and able to come back. What I really like about these comics too is it goes into the operational. He's not afraid to touch on the operational aspects of how bomber wings were organized and flew, how they found their targets, what sort of the protocols were for fighters to engage or not engage. It's just really good stuff in here. This one is Children of Israel. This one is actually not World War II either. This is actually about the Golan Heights in Israel in the war with Egypt and Syria, and specifically about the Golan Heights battle. And what's really interesting about it is that it's about these, well, it's about some locals, but it's also about some foreigners who have come to Israel to fight for them, who, you know, one of them used to be a part of the German army who's basically escaping from that world to continue fighting in a different theater. And it's basically the tank battles on the Golan Heights over the 6 or 7 days that happened. And it's about the commander and his keeping his tank crew together, and they're all, you know, mentally breaking under the strain of what's going on, and like the closeness of the battle and the number of forces they have to fight against. And it's how he keeps the crew together and manages to lead them through it. Some really great tank action in here. And it's cool to see something about, you know, a conflict that is not so mainstream. So you get a sense of like what it was like, you know, in this period. Another one of my favorites here, this is The Last German Winter. So this is about a family of German civilians who are trying to evacuate in front of the oncoming Soviet advance. And they get rescued by an SS squadron who decides that they're going to take them all the way to Berlin if they can and help them out. And, you know, the daughter of the family kind of falls for one of these SS troops, and sort of his past gets revealed about some of the things he's done during World War II, and, you know, how he feels extremely guilty for, you know, having this girl fall for him and her thinking he's a hero when he's not. Yeah, it's a very great character drama about, you know, something that, you know, may or could have happened conceivably, and maybe did, but certainly puts you in the shoes of the time and, you know, the ramifications of people who lived through the horror that was World War II. And finally, the last book in this series only has a couple stories in it, but they're actually really good, all by the same artist, Thomas Ira, perhaps. So this first one is... So this first one is called Our Wild Geese Go, and it's about the Irish rifleman who served in the British Army during World War II. Again, coming back to that theme of, you know, the Irish, their role in this conflict. You know, they never really are heralded or championed for what they did, but it takes a long look at sort of all the various points of view of different Irish people, both from Ireland and Northern Ireland, about why they chose to join the British Army and fight for the country in World War II. And sort of the conflict between them. Obviously, you know, some of these guys were around during the Irish sort of Civil War and conflict there, and so they've taken with them a lot of baggage about that, and having to serve next to people who may have been their enemies or who were their enemies, and sort of the lasting trauma that's caused on them and their relationships. And this one goes some really interesting places, and you learn a lot about sort of the different viewpoints that, you know, Irish people would have had in this era. All while starting to come together in sort of like intense combat situations like you're seeing here. So this is another great one. And the final story here is a story called Tokyo Club, and it's about the U.S. pilots who flew from Iwo Jima to mainland Japan, doing escorting bombers, attack runs, intercepting Japanese planes over Japan, sort of in the final stages of the Pacific Theater. Some really great, again, air combat sequences. Really a good look at sort of the danger and the just absolutely crazy logistical problem that was flying so far in P-51s. I guess it sort of has sort of a negative commentary on the meat grinder that was the American war machine, where they were only thinking basically in math, hard numbers, about what percentage of losses of people in planes was okay to keep going, and how just dispassionate that was, even though there were real people making these runs, essentially. I mean, there's a scene in here where, you know, he climbs out of the cockpit and he can't walk because his legs are so cramped because he's been in there for 7 hours to Japan and back, essentially. And it also kind of shows the scale of just how depleted the Japanese army was at the time, and just how devastating these attacks by American forces were. So that's the War Stories series from Garth Ennis. If you're really interested in World War II fiction and graphic novel form, highly recommend. You should still be able to get these pretty easily. They're all great stories. He's an amazing writer. He captures character and emotion really well. And So highly recommended for me. If you like this video, I can definitely do more of these. I got plenty more war fiction in comic form, mostly from Garth Ennis, but from others as well. And I'm happy to show off some of the other books that kind of touch on the conflicts, even if they're not directly about the conflict, sort of take place in a period of conflict and sort of the repercussions of that conflict on people's lives. So yeah, feel free to leave a comment, and I can do more of these. Thanks.